Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me. And I wanted to welcome you to Emerald Ash Borer University. My name is Robin Osborne, and I'm from Michigan State University, along with my colleagues Anne Marie Nagel from Purdue University and Amy Stone from Ohio State University. We hope that you'll find this webinar informative. Today, we welcome Kathleen Knight, who is a research ecologist with the USDA Forest Service Northern Research Station in Delaware, Ohio. Kathleen was born and raised in the beautiful mountains of West Virginia, and she received a bachelor's degree in biology and in music performance from Hiram College, where she became interested in plant ecology. She received her PhD from the University of Minnesota in ecology, evolution, and behavior, working with Dr. Peter Reich. Her dissertation focused on common buckthorn invasion in Minnesota and blackcherry invasion in Poland. Kathleen's research with the USDA Forest Service Research Lab in Ohio has focused on the emerald ash borer. The work includes studying the effects of EAB on forest ecosystems, developing ash seed collection techniques, collaborating with the local middle school to design a citizen science program for EAB research and parasitoid detection, and restoration of ash ecosystems with native plants, including Dutch elm disease-resistant elm. I wanted to let you know that during the webinar, if you have questions, feel free to write them in the chat pod. We will be responding to questions after the webinar presentation is over to keep the flow of the presentation going. Please stay tuned till the end, because we would like to get your feedback, and we'll be providing a link to a survey that we'd like you to participate in. The first 10 people to participate will receive an EAB goodie bag. And even if you're already one of those lucky people that have one of those, we would still like to get some feedback. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing this week. Go to www.emeraldashborer.info to access that recording, as well as the recordings for all previous EAB University webinars. And please feel free to give us feedback about you. We always want to know how we can make this better. Thank you for attending today, and with that, Kathleen, welcome, and I'll bring up your presentation and we'll begin.
Thank you so much, Robin, and thank you all for tuning in this beautiful Ohio morning. It's one of these gray, drizzly days out here. I'll be talking about research that I've done in collaboration with many different people, and so I'll be highlighting people as I go along who are collaborators on this research. The talk I'll be giving today is on impacts of emerald ash borer on forests, and I'll focus on ash mortality. As I talk to Robin, there are a lot of people tuning in who are interested in ash mortality and tree failure, and I'll also highlight some work that I've been doing with a few students on responses of other tree species in the forests as the ash trees die. So everyone on the call, I'm sure, has heard of emerald ash borer, invasive pest from China that was discovered in southeast Michigan in 2002 and has since been spreading and wreaking havoc. Today I'll be talking about my work on ash decline and mortality and tree failure. I'll talk some about a survival analysis that I did to look at which trees survive longer than others and factors that affect survival. Responses of other tree species that fill in the gaps as the ash trees die. And then I'll end the talk with some work on survivor ash trees that we're studying for potential resistance to emerald ash borer. So to start off, I have a number of emerald ash borer monitoring sites across the state of Ohio. 60 different sites across this gradient of emerald ash borer infestation, from these sites in northwest Ohio that were the earliest infested to sites elsewhere in the state that are just beginning to be infested. We're also representing a variety of habitats and stand ages, so black ash swamps to upland white ash forests to riparian areas with green ash, and all 5 ash species that are native to the state of Ohio: black, white, green, pumpkin, and blue ash are all present in my research sites. We visit these sites every year and measure a bunch of different factors, including the health of the ash trees, symptoms of emerald ash borer, and emerald ash borer populations, and other ecological factors. One of the factors that we measure that I'll be talking about today is ash canopy condition. And this is just a rating scale from 1 to 5, where 1 is a healthy ash tree, 5 is a dead ash tree, and 2, 3, and 4 are specific stages of decline. And this is what a typical site looks like. This is Wildwood Preserve up in Toledo. When we first started monitoring the site in 2005, you can see most of the trees started out healthy at that point in time. That's the green line. Over time, the healthy trees decreased, and the black line, which is the dead trees, increased to where we were over 90% mortality by 2009. You can see partway through the infestation here, we have a mix of healthy trees, declining trees, and dead trees, and that's very typical of a site that's infested by emerald ash borer. In the middle of the infestation, you'll have this mix of trees in different stages of decline, but then shortly thereafter, the trees will be dead for the most part. So these are maps created by one of my students, Robert Ford, showing the sites over time. I started monitoring sites in Toledo in 2005, and as you can see, this is ash health is the color scheme in the legend there on the left. So the green sites are those healthy Category 1 trees, and as they progressively become more red, red is a completely dead site. So this is the average ash health. So in 2005, most of these sites up in Toledo were starting out healthy. There were a few that had an average of 3 in yellow there. In 2006, I added more monitoring plots across the state, and most of the ones that I added were healthy to begin with. And then you can see as we get into 2007 here, the sites in Toledo are rapidly declining. We have some that have already reached 100% mortality. And you can see those sites in Toledo becoming progressively more orange and red by 2008. You can see the sites now in central Ohio starting to turn yellow there as the ash trees are experiencing decline. And then by 2009, all of the Toledo sites are dead. 2010, 2011, and by 2012, we're seeing a lot of mortality here in central Ohio. Now you can see 2012, we did lose a bunch of research sites from the map, and that's because I'm running out of funding to continue this monitoring. But I think the main results of this work, just showing how quickly that decline progresses across the state, have been a real benefit of doing this monitoring. So this is a typical site, Stratford Ecological Center. When we started monitoring it in 2007, on the y-axis is percent trees alive. There were 100% of the trees were alive, and in 2008, that red line shows when we first saw exit holes low on the trunk, low enough for us to see without climbing the trees. And you can see the percent of trees alive starting to decline over time, and then by 2011, the trees were 100% dead. There were no live trees in our plots. So if you take all of the sites that we've done research on across the state and line them up by this red line here, the first year that we saw exit holes on the trees, this is what you get. So once again, the red line is the year that exit holes first appeared low on the trunk where we can see them. And you can see the sites had a range of health before the ash trees started exhibiting exit holes, but many of them were healthy. And then within 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 years after we first started seeing exit holes, the ash trees were 100% dead. And there's a tremendous amount of variation here between how long it takes the trees to die after those exit holes appear, and that's something that we looked at in our survival analysis, and I'll talk about a little bit later in the talk. But the overall message is that the end result of emerald ash borer infesting a site is 100% or nearly 100% mortality within 1 to 6 years of the exit holes appearing at the site. So after the trees die, they fall down, and this is, I put this in the talk because I know there are a lot of tree care experts on the call who are interested in tree failure. So these are the trees that we were monitoring that died in each year and how many fell each year thereafter. So the year that we found the tree dead, we had a mean of 1% that had already fallen the year that they died. 1 year after the tree was dead, 7% of them had fallen. 2 years after the tree died, 20% had fallen. 3 years after, 36%. 4 years after, 59%. And 5 years after the tree had died, 82% of the trees had fallen. And so this really shows that the ash are acting differently than what you might see from a beech or an elm, which remain standing for long periods of time after they die. The ash trees really become very brittle and break up and fall very quickly. And just anecdotally speaking with managers at some of the sites that have been dealing with dead trees, the trees are much more difficult to remove after they're dead because they do become brittle and they do unexpected things as they're being cut. So it's a lot easier and safer to remove the trees right before they die or very shortly thereafter. So what this shows is basically, you don't have very long to remove the trees before they start falling and becoming hazards after they're dead. For metro parks and places with high-use trails and the potential for a lot of dead trees, I would personally recommend either removing the trees shortly before they die or right after. Either that, or if there are low-use trails with a tremendous number of ash trees, you could potentially close the trail for 6 or 7 years and have most of the ash trees fall on their own and not have to be removed. So after the trees die, they also start losing branches. And so we started looking at the trees that we had in our plots and rating them on a scale of A to E depending on how much of the branches they had lost. So condition A being a tree that has all of its fine twigs newly dead, going down to condition E, which is just the central stem remaining and pretty much all of the branches already have fallen off. And so this was data just from 2010 for trees that died in each of these years. So for trees that died in 2009 and had only been dead 1 year by 2010, most of them were this category B or C, so they still had some of their fine twigs, either more than 50% as a category B or less than 50% as a category C. When you get into trees that had been dead, that died in 2008 and had been dead 2 years, most of them were category C, but some of them had already started losing a lot of their branches and were category D or E. 2007 is trees that were mostly category D at this point, but all three categories are really represented there. And by the time you get to trees that had died in 2005 and are mostly broken up by 2010, 5 years later, most of them just have the central stem still standing. And this information is in progress. We're working on a paper on it. We haven't published this information yet. So one of the things that I showed was this tremendous variation in how long it takes a tree to stand to die after we see exit holes. And so we did a survival analysis to understand what factors cause trees to die faster or slower. and this has been published in Biological Invasions. I won't get into the nitty-gritty of the statistical analysis, but the survival analysis, we did look at a number of different possible predictors and did an all subsets model, and so we tested which of these predictors were the best ones. The best model did have the predictors canopy condition, crown class, trees per hectare, and hydrology, and I'll talk a little bit about those results. With canopy condition, not surprisingly, the trees that were initially healthier survived longer than the trees that were initially starting out stressed. This isn't surprising, as we know that emerald ash borer is attracted to stressed trees. We also found that dominant and codominant trees survived longer than trees that were intermediate or suppressed underneath the canopy and getting less light. So the dominant and codominant trees may have more resources to be able to withstand the emerald ash borer infestation longer. We also found something very surprising. We found that trees in higher density ash stands survived longer than trees in stands that had lower ash density. So on the left here we see a forest that is mostly ash trees. It has a very high density of ash trees. All of these trees in the picture are ash. And then on the right we see one lone ash tree that's in a mixed forest of hickories and maples and many other species. And what we see is that the ash tree in the stand on the right, the trees will die much faster. And I think what's going on is what we would term a resource dilution effect. So in a stand that has a lot of different ash trees, the emerald ash borers, when they first come into the stand, are really spread out among many of the different ash trees. So the per capita ash borer load ends up being lower and lengthens the amount of time it takes to kill all those trees. Whereas in the stand at the right, we know ash borers are really good at finding ash trees, and so all of the ash borers coming into that stand will attack and re-attack those few ash trees that are in the stand. However, even with these differences in how long it takes the trees to die, as you remember, pretty much all of the end result is the same. Pretty much all of the trees are dead within a 6-year time period. So I want to talk about the responses of some of the other tree species in these stands. One of my students, Kyle Costello, looked at maple growth. On the right you see dead ash trees in the canopy here at oak openings, and we had a dense mid-story of maples and elms that grew up and filled in those gaps. And Kyle looked at tree rings on the cores from these maple trees to understand the growth response of those trees. And also looked at the crown class of those trees to see if they were actually released, whether they changed from being suppressed under the canopy of those ash trees to being now codominant and not shaded anymore. And what Kyle found was a very rapid growth response of these released trees. On the lower right, you can see the percent of ash trees that were dead. So we had very few ash trees dead in 2005, and mortality began to bump up here in 2006 and 2007. And 2008, the ash trees were dead. What we saw in radial growth of the maple trees responding to the death of those ash trees was increase in growth almost right away as that mortality began to occur. So the maple trees really responded rapidly and started filling in those gaps. Another student who's been working with me, Charles Flower, was looking at the different species in their growth response and found that the maple trees and elm trees are the trees that really have the greatest response as the ash trees have died in those stands. Charlie also found that the growth response depends on the amount of ash mortality that you have in the stand. So in stands that have a greater basal area of ash, you do have a greater growth rate of the maples in those stands as the canopy opens up. And this work has been published in Biological Invasions. So I'll move on. I've been saying, almost 100% of the ash trees die, and I'm sure there are people wondering, so what happens with those other, what are these other trees that are surviving that she's saying almost 100%? So these other trees that are surviving, especially the ones that are healthy, are trees that we have started to call lingering ash, because we're not sure if they're just lingering longer than the rest of the population and just the last to die, or if they're ultimately going to survive. So the trees that we're especially interested in are in areas that have been infested for a very long time by emerald ash borer, where over 95% mortality of the mature ash trees has occurred at least 2 years ago. The tree has to have been large enough to be infested during the peak of the EAB infestation. So the emerald ash borer infestation, emerald ash borer can only infest trees that are at least 1 inch in diameter, and we know that ash trees grow very rapidly. So we're not as interested in trees that were very small, too small to be infested during that peak. And of course, the tree has to currently be a healthy looking tree. And so we found trees that do fit these definitions. Dan Herms has done surveys at Indian Springs Metro Park of a population of ash that seems to be surviving, and I've done surveys at Oak Openings Metro Park. The green arrow here is on Oak Openings in Northwest Ohio. And the results of this work has been published in a proceedings paper that just came out. So this is Oak Openings, and you can see that we reached nearly 100% mortality in 2008. So by that definition of waiting 2 years after 95% mortality, the first year we really wanted to take a good look for potentially surviving ash was 2010. So in 2010, we did a survey of the entire Swan Creek floodplain. Swan Creek is this river that goes from north to south throughout Oak Openings Metro Park. We surveyed all 7 miles of Swan Creek and found 302 living ash trees that were bigger than 10 centimeters dBH, diameter at breast height. 111 of those trees were healthy, and we've resurveyed these trees in 2011 and 2012. And the punchline is that many of the healthy trees are continuing to stay healthy over time, and I'll show you some details of this. From our survey, we estimate that there were approximately 11,000 green ash trees along Swan Creek that died. By 2010, 2,300 of them had already fallen, and so the floodplain is full of piles of dead wood and is a bit of a mess. The live ash trees that we found were almost always right near dead ash trees. So here's a live ash tree, here's a dead ash tree that had died from emerald ash borer some time ago. So we don't think the live trees just happened to be in an area that was just somehow missed by emerald ash borer. We think there's something that's potentially actually different about these trees. We tagged all of the live ash trees with do not cut signs and GPS them, just in case some of the dead ash removal efforts came near them in the winter. People would know that not to cut those trees. We have been measuring emerald ash borer populations at this site and found that emerald ash borer is persisting at very low densities and is still potentially attacking these trees. So again, we've monitored the surviving ash trees on this 1 through 5 scale, where 1 is healthy and 5 is dead. And this is showing you how those trees are surviving over time. So the trees that we found in 2010, on the left, these are the ratings from 2010, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then across the top are the 2011 ratings, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 being dead. So the way to read this is that 75% of the trees that were rated a 1 in 2010 continued to be rated a 1 in 2011. So these trees stayed healthy. 18% of the trees that were rated a 1 in 2010 were rated a 2 in 2011. None of the trees that were rated a 1 in 2010 died by 2011. So you can see that with these trees, most of the healthy trees are remaining healthy between 2010 and 2011. Some of these condition 2 trees that are pretty healthy, thinning a little bit, many of them stayed stable over time as well. The trees that were rated a 3 or a 4 in 2010, however, were continuing to decline or dying by 2011. So what this told us was that those trees that we found that were looking healthy, that are these potential lingering ash, are trees that have stayed healthy over time. They're not trees that were in severe decline and have recovered. So then looking at what happened in 2012, now we have on the left side the trees from 2011, and then across the top the ratings in 2012. And you see once again most of the healthy trees are remaining healthy. And many of the condition 2 trees are also staying stable. So what we see here, though, that really got me excited is 86% of the condition 1s are staying condition 1s. So this is an increase from the previous year. So if we back up one slide, 75% stayed healthy from 2010 to 2011. And then in 2012, 86% stayed healthy. So we'd love to see that number in the upper left continue to go up until we have a completely stable population of healthy trees that just stay healthy over time. So we were really encouraged to see that number increasing even in a drought year of 2012. And I see on the left chat there's a bit of a conversation on the trees that are being infested and what the size limit is. And the emerald ash borer larva can only survive in trees that are about 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters in diameter at breast height. So the trunk diameter of the tree has to be at least 1 inch. And below that, we haven't actually found any exit holes. I think trees below that, the ash borer probably girdles the tree before the tree is able to let that ash borer continue its development and actually emerge. So what factors predict whether one of these lingering ash trees will remain healthy? This is something that I'm working on with a few students. Britton Flash and Rachel Kapler were working on a paper to try to understand the factors that predict which of these lingering ash trees will remain healthy over time and which ones are just the last trees to die. So stay tuned for that research to come out. So in the future with this lingering ash research, we'll be continuing to monitor the population dynamics of these lingering ash populations, and we're hoping to continue to search for more lingering ash trees. I'd especially like to find some lingering black ash. We've found green ash and white ash that's surviving, but we haven't really found black ash. We're also continuing to monitor emerald ash borer populations in these areas to see what happens with them over time. Will they start to build and peak again, or will they stay stable at low densities, or will they die out? And then I'm working with collaborators on some really exciting work to test these trees for resistance to emerald ash borer. In the photo here is one of my collaborators, Mary Mason, sampling a lingering ash tree, collecting scion material to graft onto rootstock here at the lab and test for resistance to emerald ash borer. And this work on the resistance to emerald ash borer is detailed in a publication by Jennifer Cook that has just come out in a proceedings as well. So I just want to summarize some of the work that I've talked about today. We talked about ash decline and mortality, with the take-home message being that these trees die very quickly once you see exit holes low on the trunk, which is usually after the site has been already infested for several years before you'll manage to see some exit holes. You don't really have much time left before you're going to have a lot of dead trees. After the trees die, they do tend to fall and break up very quickly and become very brittle and dangerous. The survival analysis showed a surprising result that stands that have a higher density of ash trees actually have slower mortality over time by a few years than stands that have only a small number of ash trees. We are seeing other tree species rapidly respond to fill in the gaps, especially maple species. And we're seeing this really exciting and somewhat hopeful survivor ash trees that are actually remaining healthy over time. Now, these are less than 1% of the population. You know, I said there were over 11,000 trees in the Swan Creek floodplain that died, and we only have now less than 100 trees that look healthy in that stand. So it's a very small number of trees that actually seems to survive and persist over time. However, they are exciting to be researching, and Jennifer Cook's preliminary work on resistance of those trees seems to be very promising. And I did want to mention that I do have a number of people that I need to thank, people who have helped collect field data over the years, numerous research sites that have allowed us to come in and conduct our research, collaborators, Robert Long, Daniel Herms, John Cardina, Wendy Klooster, Kamal Gandhi, Brian Hoven, and Ben Dolan, who have helped with various parts of this work, as well as the students that I've mentioned during the talk who have done tremendous work, Robert Ford, Charlie Flower, Britton Flash, and Kyle Costello. We've also had great input from managers as we started this project on what types of questions we should be looking at that would be helpful for them to know. And we also thank our funding sources that make the work possible. And I did want to go ahead at this point and point you to some resources as well. So Robin's pulling up a sheet that has some of the publications that I've mentioned during the talk that have come out. My website has all the publications on it and links to those publications. So if you go to nrs.fs.fed.us, people KS Night, there are links to all of these publications. I just wanted to pull out a couple of publications that have been helpful to people. We do have a publication on ash seed collection. We've been working on methods to collect ash seeds to preserve ash species. The seeds are stored at the National Seed Lab for future restoration and research on ash. So we have a publication and a video on how to collect ash seeds. There's the paper on the ash survival analysis. A paper on these surviving ash populations, the lingering ash, Jennifer Cook's paper on breeding ash trees that are emerald ash borer resistant, a paper on some of my work on restoring emerald ash borer impacted floodplain forests. We're using elm trees that are resistant to Dutch elm disease in our restoration of emerald ash borer impacted floodplains. And then finally, curriculum materials for middle school science students on emerald ash borer that I've been working on as a collaborative effort with OSU Extension. And with that, I will take any questions.
Okay, Kathleen, we have a few for you. David wants to know, and then you may have already just answered this question, but he wanted to know if you have the downloadable report that includes the information in the PowerPoint. Would this be on your website as part of your publications?
Some of the information in the PowerPoint is not published yet, but once it is published, it will show up on my website. And then any of the information that is published is already on the website.
All right. Radka would like to know what the proportion of seedlings are in the stands that you are studying.
There are a lot of small seedlings that are too small to be infested by emerald ash borer that survive in a lot of these stands. We had a mast year for ash seeds in 2008, and after that mast year we saw a lot of small seedlings come up. And we are tracking the smaller seedlings over time. So they are growing and starting to fill in the gaps. Unfortunately, as they reach susceptible size, some of them are getting picked off by emerald ash borer. But we are monitoring those small seedlings over time, and there are quite a good number of them.
Righty. Bob had a comment. You did not go into detail on how hydrology affects the speed of death.
Right. Good catch, Bob. That was significant in the survival analysis. The results were really confusing, though, as it came out. It looked like sites that were intermediate in their moisture died faster than sites that were very dry or very wet. And part of the issue was that the moisture of the site was confounded with the different species. So we didn't have a test of black ash on dry sites. Black ash were only in the very wet sites, for example. So we couldn't really tease apart those results in a very satisfying way. So we do have some results on that, but they are kind of confusing at this point. We're hoping that with some additional data and some additional tests, we may have more to say about that.
All right. Radka wanted to know how many, and she's looking for a percentage of the small size, less than 2.5 centimeters, are surviving in the populations where EAB killed all the adult trees. Do you want to know if you have that information?
I don't have that at my fingertips, the percent of the small ash that survive. None of the small ash that are really little are getting killed by EAB, but they do, you do have mortality of small tree seedlings, quite a bit of mortality of small tree seedlings in forests just naturally over time. So of any tree species. And so you do have these small ash seedlings dying from other factors or from being shaded in some of these forests. But I don't have those numbers at my fingertips right now.
Okay. Marquetta would like to know how long after 100% tree death can young ash be safely introduced?
We don't know. We have never found a site where emerald ash borer disappears from the site. So we don't have any sites yet that we would consider safe to introduce unprotected ash trees.
All right. Let's see. Has there been any maps made for any of the data?
So just what Rob Ford is working on. So you saw the maps that he made of the ash, the average ash condition, ash canopy health. He's also working on maps on percent mortality of the ash trees and on the emerald ash borer populations in those sites. So we'll be publishing a paper on that because I think those maps are really helpful for people to kind of see how quickly that wave of mortality is moving across the state.
Okay. Is there any significant findings as to what the lingering ash may be taken up through soil systemically? Variations in soil testing from a lingering ash to its neighbor that died?
We haven't done any tests of the soil between the lingering ash and its close by neighbors. We're hoping that what's going on with the lingering ash is something that's genetic rather than something that's induced by soil conditions or other environmental conditions. So when we collect scion material and graft it to replicate them and create little identical lingering ash trees here at the lab, we can grow all of those trees in the same soils in pots as trees that we know are ash trees that are susceptible. And so we can test them to see if there's something genetic going on rather than something environmental or soil borne. And so far that the results do look promising. It does look like the lingering ash, even when grown, in the greenhouse in identical conditions to ash trees that are susceptible, do have greater resistance to the emerald ash borers, and that's Jennifer Cook's work, so definitely check out her proceedings publication on that.
Radka would like to know, is there a minimum host population size necessary for EAB attraction?
No. It is so good at finding ash trees. If you had one ash tree out in the middle of nowhere, I think it would find it. I mean, we've been in. I purposefully, set up some of my monitoring plots in forests that have a very low density of ash trees. Just, an ash tree here and an ash tree there, very widely separated, and it finds every one of them. So we really don't see a minimum population size of ash trees for them to be attracted.
I know that we have here at Michigan State at the Tree Research Center, we have a plot where they are looking at different varieties of ash trees, anything from what's coming, the Asian ones to, other species across the country, and even some foreign species. And emerald ash borer seems to like all of them. It's just something about it that these little critters are just going after. So let's see. Marquetta says, any statistics regarding treated trees? I'm not exactly sure what that means.
I haven't really studied any of the trees that have been treated with insecticides at this point, so I can't really speak to that. Sorry.
Okay. Right now, I know that there has been, if you get on emeraldashborer.info, there is some information on some statistics on treated trees in different studies. So that might be a place you'd like to go and get into the treatment link and look at some of that information there. There's quite a bit. So I hope that's helpful too. So let's see if we have any other questions. Regarding the species of ash, what is more attractive to emerald ash borer than others? Yes, there is some studies that show that green ash is first preferred, but you put an emerald ash borer in most any species, they will eventually get to most all of them. So
yeah, I mean, what we're seeing with our go on.
Go ahead. No,
what we're seeing with our work in terms of the preference for different tree species is, there are very, very slight differences in preference between, white and green and black and pumpkin ash, but they're really slight, and like I said, in our work they're somewhat confounded with the habitat type. But the big difference that we see is with blue ash. So all of those other species, there may be slight preferences in those other species, but with blue ash is significantly less preferred than the other species. At our sites that have a mix of blue ash and white ash, we see all of the white ash dying and all of the blue ash still being alive, but then the blue ash starts to get infested and starts to die later. So they really do seem to go first for all of the other species before they go for the blue ash, but they will, like Robin was saying, they will eat anything, so once they run out of everything else, they will go for the blue ash.
All right, let's see. Yes, we do. I just saw kind of an talking about treated trees. Dan Herms from Ohio State will be doing an EAB University session in March to kind of as an update on some insecticide options, because I know there's some folks that have been asking about that. And yes, this webinar will be available either later today or tomorrow as far as a recorded session, so you can watch it again or you can use it as an educational tool. Let's see. Oh, we have one more question. What is the progression of infestation in a stand? How quickly the infestation spreads, and is the spread different among size and age categories?
So the progression of infestation in a stand, early on, what you'll see is, you won't see anything. It's really tough to detect when it's at low densities. So emerald ash borer will come in at low densities. The ash trees will still be looking healthy. You won't see anything. At a year or two later, you'll start maybe seeing some woodpecker feeding high up on a few trees in the stand, but not many. It usually starts out going after the stress trees in the stand. So if there's an ash tree that's stressed by something else, that may be one of the first trees that emerald ash borer goes after. And they really seem to infest and reinfest those first trees because, they're attracted to stressed trees. So they go after a stressed tree in the stand, and then as they go after it, it becomes even more stressed and more attractive. So they continue to reinfest that tree until it's dying. And so that stressed ash tree that's loaded with EAB could be right next to a healthy ash tree that's not touched early in the infestation, even though the healthy tree is perfectly susceptible to it. After that first round of the very first trees to be infested are dying, emerald ash borer starts to spread out to the other trees in the stand. By then its population has built a lot, and so the other trees start dying a lot more quickly since the ash borer's population has built up so much. And then as you get to late in the infestation, you've got a lot of dead trees in the stand and a smaller number of trees that are still alive. And so you've got this huge emerald ash borer population, and they just go into those few remaining ash trees and kill them off really quickly. So that's kind of the progression that we see over time. After the ash trees are dead, the emerald ash borer population crashes because they don't have any more food. They do persist at low levels though. So whereas in a peak year we would catch maybe 200 or 300 emerald ash borers on a trap, after the population crashes we're back down to catching maybe 10 or 20 on a trap each year. And so the infestation really spreads among many different sizes or age categories all at once. It doesn't seem to have a preference too much, except for avoiding those really small trees in the infestation. Is there, I guess, is there any other follow-up questions with that? I don't know if there's any other progression issues that I should address there.
I'm not seeing any. I think unless we have a lot more questions, I will keep this open here if we can just stay on for maybe a couple more minutes. So maybe 11:49. How about that? If anyone has any more questions,
Sure.
We'll stay on for that. And but right now, I think that we've all learned a lot. Thank you, Kathleen. This has been great. I appreciate you being on and presenting this information. And I think we're seeing a lot of great responses right now from people that are also very thankful for you taking the time to give us this information today. Let's see. How long do you think they move from the stressed trees onto the healthy trees? I have a question there.
Right. Maybe a couple years, maybe 2 years. I mean, that's just from one site where we've been able to actually peel ash trees and look at them over time. So it's tough to generalize to all sites, but at this one site where we peeled trees each year for 3 years, the trees that were initially stressed, we saw trees that were completely untouched for a few years while they were just infesting and reinfesting those initially stressed trees. I see a question on here from Tom Case on silvicultural recommendations for treating stands with a high density of ash. It would be really expensive to treat a stand with a high density of ash. The insecticide options at the moment are most useful for treating individual, high value landscape trees, or even individual high value trees, in a metro park if you wanted to preserve certain large individual trees. Treating an entire stand of ash with the insecticides that you have to do repeated applications would get very expensive very quickly. The silvicultural recommendations that I've seen are to think about your, like any other forest stand management, think about your goals for the site and for the stand. This could be viewed as an opportunity to diversify the stand, planting other tree species if other tree species aren't already present that you would like to have growing there. taking a good look at the invasive plant species that are in the stand and perhaps removing them before that canopy opens up and allows the invasive species to grow. So there are silvicultural things that you can be doing to help keep that a healthy stand over time. However, at the moment with the current treatment options, I don't know anyone who's actually treating an entire stand, a high-density stand of ash trees. Any other last questions?
I am not seeing any at this point. And as you all know that you can either email me or and I can forward any questions on to Kathleen, or if you can probably Google her name, if nothing less, and find her email address if you have any other questions, or you can get back on the webinar after it's recorded and check out that information if you missed anything. So I just wanted to say to everyone, thank you again for attending, and we're going to wrap this up here pretty quickly. Thank you very much, Kathleen.